Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and this is another episode of The New Yorker. And we're going to take a look at what's going on in the world. So, what's happening in American politics lately? On Monitor 1, we have a big, gigantic fire that's happening. What's happening in the Middle East? In Monitor number 2, it's on fire. What's happening with Ukraine and Russia? And how the national security state is ushering in World War III. It's on fire. What about on the last monitor, Monitor 4, what's going on in Asia and the encroachment of China onto Taiwan? It's on fire. There's a theme here. The world is inflamed. To stop inflammation and improve your health, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and make sure that you get turmeric. The turmeric that I have is very high quality, and it will bring down inflammation, and it's an antioxidant. So it'll help with cellular stress. And also take the ashwagandha root, which helps to control blood glucose levels. By taking both of those supplements, what will happen is that you're bringing down that inflammation. You're bringing down that the overabundance of glucose in your bloodstream, and that's one of the pillars for my anti-aging protocol. The other pillar is a strong antioxidant like C60. You can get it in coconut oil or avocado oil in a 2-ounce, a 4-ounce, or an 8-ounce configuration. It's a very strong antioxidant that soaks up free radicals. By soaking up free radicals, you're reducing the damage to the cells, you're improving the tissue health, and you're improving the mitochondrial health, and you'll boost up your ATP. That means you'll have more energy. And by doing that, your tissues and your cells will perform properly. In addition, the last pillar of the protocol, the core of the protocol, is taking structural nanosilver liquid. The Max 35, you take a teaspoon of it a day, you swish it in your mouth, you gargle with it, you swallow it, and it'll neutralize pathogens. By neutralizing pathogens, by reducing the free radicals, and by bringing down the inflammation that is being produced in your body. You do this every day, and your body is going to move closer to homeostasis, and you're going to notice that there's a compound effect where you're aging slower, you're going to have more energy, you're going to be able to heal better, and some of the chronic problems that you've had will be mitigated. That's the core of the anti-aging protocol. All right? The whole world is burning down. And the powers that be want to harm your health. So why don't you take control of your life and do proper supplementation, proper diet, proper exercise, proper balancing, proper training your brain, and proper sleep. You can get all these supplements on my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, as the world burns down. Now, there's probably no one else that you want to hear as the world is burning down than Dr. Paul Cottrell, not even Alex Jones. So let's begin with what's going on in the news. All right, this is about Ukraine. We're forced to negotiate. If Ukraine was forced to negotiate, Zelensky would not survive a negotiation. All right, let's see what they have to say. This is France 24, which is a news organization that I like listening to.
arrived in Kyiv. Their presence meant it Friday, if confirmed, it would be a major win for the country as it marks the second anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. It comes as the prime ministers of Italy, Canada, Belgium, and the president of the European Commission arrived in Kyiv. Their
Western solidarity, despite a lack of Western aid and ammunition, all while Russia is emboldened by fresh gain. Friday, if confirmed, it would be a major win for the country as it marks the second anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. It comes as the prime ministers of Italy, Canada, Belgium, and the president of the European Commission arrived in Kyiv. Their presence meant to display Western solidarity despite a lack of Western aid and ammunition, all while Russia is emboldened by fresh gains. The war has cost tens of thousands of lives and ravaged Ukraine's economy. Here to help us take stock after 2 years is Samantha de Van Dern, an associate fellow at Chatham House. Hello to you, Samantha, as well as our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Doug, Samantha, I want to begin with you. When this war began, some of the stories we were reading so much about were of Ukrainian resilience, inspiration, Western solidarity. After 2 years, are cracks beginning to show?
Yes, they are. I think they are. And first of all, Ukrainian resilience, I think, is holding up. I mean, yes, people are tired. Yes, there are many tired soldiers, but the country is.
I think if you really talk to the people that were on the ground and covering Ukraine since the beginning of the war with Russia, I would say that Ukraine has been propped up financially and militarily by the United States primarily. And the media propped them up, making it seem as though they were stronger. The reality of the situation was there were a lot of age-bound males that could have fought that tried to run. I think people should look into that. They were trying to dodge their draft. I'm not so sure that there was a will for the war.
Resilient, it's still fighting, it is still there. And that, I think, is the biggest lesson to take from this, is that when the war started, everyone was predicting that Ukraine would fall in days. 731 days later, the president is still in place. Russia has managed to conquer a little bit more territory, but it has also lost some of the territory it's conquered. However, I think that the West is, as always towards Ukraine, does not really know what it wants to do with Ukraine. There's been another package of sanctions that was announced last week, really after the death of Alexei Navalny, and it felt that it was more about
the Russian
opposition leader. And when I read the latest US sanctions, I thought, what? They've only now started sanctioning some of these companies that are directly contributing to the war effort. They're only now beginning to sanction parts of Rosatom, the nuclear energy industry.
And why were they dragging their feet?
They're dragging their feet because there are so many Western financial interests that are interlinked with Russia's financial interests. It's taken a long time. The US still imports.
They were trying to do a controlled demolition in Russia that backfired. That's what's happening. Brought to you by Goldman Sachs and the CIA.
Uranium from Russia for the US nuclear industry. When the sanctions began, there were some very prominent oligarchs who were sanctioned, yes, but some who were not sanctioned because they were needed for Western business deals. So, yes, the West has united. NATO is more united than ever. NATO is actually enlarged. Putin should win, Recruiter of the Year for NATO. But the West is still doesn't really seem to be understanding the scale of the threat from Russia. It's beginning to wake up. In the last few weeks, people seem to have been waking up. When Russia has been making it very clear and attacking the West in a form of hybrid warfare for nearly 2 decades. And I'm wondering what it will take for the West to really wake up and to really unite and decide, what they want to do with Ukraine, whether they really want to help Ukraine, or whether it's going to be a lot of nice words, visiting Kiev, saying, oh yes, we're here to support you, but still not giving Ukraine the munitions it's been asking for 2 years. And last thing I really like to say is that a lot of Ukrainians, a lot of military analysts say if the West had given Ukraine adequate weapons from the very beginning, not just this drip feed that's been going on over 2 years, drip feed with a lot of noise, and yes, a lot of money has been given. A lot of weapons have not been able to be given because the West doesn't have it. A lot of weapons were not given because there was this fear of escalation. And now red lines have been crossed, and it's a sort of red line, it's kind of a red snake that sort of, wriggles around and changes according to what we feel. But if the weapons had been given in the very beginning, this war might be over by now.
Yeah, Doug, Samantha mentioned those sanctions. How has Russia's economy fared in the face of those sanctions?
Relatively speaking, it is in fine fettle. Not just despite the sanctions, Putin and his allies might argue because of, thanks to those sanctions. We've seen it in the past, this pattern, sort of perpetuating itself, right? You impose sanctions, and Russia has an amazing resilience and ability to build a cottage industry. So the sanctions have, in a way, paradoxically, spurred Russian domestic production. Now, here's the bad news, or the bad news, at least from a Western perspective, Europe, US. Russia's economy and its overall growth last year outpaced growth in both the US and Europe. It was about 3.5, 3.6%. That's pretty solid growth. A lot of that, most of that, was thanks to ramped up spending, huge investment on the military. We're arguing here in Europe about spending 2% of GDP on European militaries in order to bring it up to NATO standards. Russia has spent about one third of its budget, I'm not misspeaking here, on its military last year, and that's only been rising.
Now, it's important to keep in mind, as we traverse time in Dante's Inferno, as AI gets implemented and there's a decoupling of labor and capital, less people will be purchasing products, especially the lifestyle that they're used to in the United States. O'Leary from Shark Tank has already mentioned this. So this is not new news, all right? But the whole idea here is that there's going to be a shift in demand because of AI, because there's going to be less people employed. And in the short term, there's going to be stress in the society as the GDP starts to go down, where the powers that be are going to start producing war production to try to boost some of the earnings of Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Raytheon and all these other companies that are tied to the military-industrial complex, and now the biological military-industrial complex. So we're going to go into kind of a war production mode to boost up earnings for some of these companies. Once we start seeing the massive layoffs that start to happen in AI, you're starting to see it in tech. But wait until it comes to outside of the tech world. You're going to start seeing a structural unemployment starting to rise up. Now, I was overhearing a conversation today of a banker that was doing a deal dealing with AI. I'm not sure if it was just AI or AI and robotics. That wasn't clear from what I overheard. But they were mentioning during the conversation that this is going to change demand dynamics. And the need for certain production is going to go down because of the implementation of AI, because people are going to have less jobs to buy the products that companies are making. So even the bankers are thinking about this and how the demand curve is going to shift negatively, not positively. Dante's Inferno.
As The effect on ordinary Russians, sure, they don't have their Western shops to go to anymore. Sure, they're not traveling to Europe as much. It's much harder to get the visas, all of that. But however, in terms of ordinary life, about 2/3 of Russians, according to the latest polls, say that they are economically the same or even better off than they were before the full-scale invasion 2 years ago. Unemployment is down. Russia and Putin is practically gloating. Trade with India, China, Brazil, largely helping Putin a lot to do what we would say is an end run around sanctions and to really keep the economy churning. How long they can keep it up, who knows?
Yes.
For now, they're okay.
Samantha, you wanted
No, I'd really like to react to that. So yes, the Russian GDP is growing. That is military spending. If the war stops tomorrow, the GDP will collapse. That is really, this is a fake growth.
Yeah. It's an economy built on
Secondly, I don't actually believe opinion polls in Russia today.
You can't trust anyone. Yeah.
But thirdly, you look at what's happening to Russians.
Honey, it's the wrong term. There's no such thing as fake growth. It's growth that's not sustainable. It's growth that is due to a war effort. It's real growth. The only time you would have fake growth is you actually fake the numbers, like they do in China, and it seems as though what they're doing in the United States when it comes to the unemployment.
Heating systems collapsing, planes not being able to be maintained because they can't get the components from the West. Automobile production was down by 80% at the end of 2022, and the statistics were so dramatic that Putin forbade Rosstat, the Russian statistical agency, from publishing figures on civilian industry because the figures are actually so catastrophic.
But this is a war of attrition. And size matters, and
Yeah,
Russia is bigger than Ukraine.
Yeah, size matters. Russia's bigger. Russia has more resources. Russia's not a democracy, so who cares if civilian planes fall out of the sky? People are not going to complain about that. And Russia has more people. So yes, that is a really serious problem that the West and Ukraine has to look at right in the face without any illusion.
I want to ask you the question about Ukrainian politics down the road. Zelensky's term ends in May. There's martial law in Ukraine that allows for the elections to sort of be postponed. What is the situation with domestic politics in Ukraine, and are you concerned what will come in May?
Well, first of all, the Ukrainian constitution actually forbids elections to take place during martial law and during wartime. So that is not necessarily illegal from a Ukrainian point of view, but it's true that there are political problems within Ukraine. I was last there in December, and you could really feel a lot of tension. A lot of people don't like Zelensky, in spite of the fact that we all adore him in the West. Inside Ukraine, he has a lot more ambivalence towards him. There's a recognition that he is the commander-in-chief, that he has brought the country together and done a wonderful job in seducing the West. But inside, there is a lot of political infighting still, Some of it is the result of Russian disinformation. Some of it is the result of the continuing corruption in Ukraine. There's a whole panoply of things. Ukraine is a thriving democracy in the ways that people are arguing all the time. The problem is, in a wartime, it's probably better to not be arguing so much. And we saw the removal of Valery Zaluzhny, who was the chief of staff of the armed forces, replaced by somebody else. Now, again, there are various versions as to what this means. Some say it's because Zaluzhny was a political threat to Zelensky. Other people say, well, he had to be removed because in wartime, people often change chiefs of staff. It happened in the Second World War in the UK, in France, and so it's not such a big deal. But there are political tensions within Ukraine. And of course, if Ukraine were forced to negotiate at some point, then you could expect those tensions to meet. Zelensky would not survive a negotiation. And the question is, who would be in Zelensky's place? Would we have a Russian puppet, or would we have someone on the other end of the spectrum who could be an extreme nationalist? Neither of these options are actually good for Europe.
Running out of time, Doug.
Yeah.
Where is Putin's support?
Look, you're absolutely right. The polls, you can't trust them as far as you can throw them. Most Russians are not disinclined, just putting it mildly, to speak truth to pollsters. They don't trust them either. So they're very wary. Everyone's looking over their back. We're back to the Soviet-style period where, neighbors denounce neighbors. Schools are all patriotic. Even school children denounce their classmates. So that the atmosphere is repressive. It's not conducive to polls. That said, with that giant caveat and asterisk, if you're to believe some of the polls,
we expanded NATO before Putin, or was trying to expand NATO before Putin. We had a Cold War mentality because shock therapy didn't work by Jeffrey Sachs.
Levada Center by some of the more respected pollsters in Russia who try to get beyond people's reticence to tell the truth. Putin's popularity is at a 7-year high right now, which is astounding when you think of it. And why is that? Because he has, under the filter of state-controlled media, this filter bubble where people are not able, unless you're young and have VPNs and access to internet, able to get out of that filter bubble. The 100 million plus Russians who sit in front of their TVs and still watch the state-controlled channel every night have been sold the myth, and I will call it a myth, that Ukraine poses an existential threat to Russia, even if he's not still using the language as frequently, denazify Ukraine, Nazis, neo-Nazis running the government. Even if that language isn't used as often, it's still very much there, and it's very much still sold, in a sense, to a large majority of the Russian public. A lot of people don't speak out politically. They become apolitical, apathetic. They just want to keep their own lives, not get into the fray at all. So the polls are absolutely misleading, but Putin, given that, still remains at an all-time high.
A lot to unpack here. I wish we had more time, but I want to thank our guest, Samantha de Vendern from Chatham House, Douglas Herbert, our international affairs commentator. Thanks to you both.
All right. So that was pretty good. Let's take a look at DW.
The truth is that the easiest and most effective way to address your skin
My name is Nick Connolly. I've been reporting from Ukraine for DW since 2017. I was here when Vladimir Putin's troops crossed the border in February of 2022. We spent that first night in the bomb shelter under our office here in Kyiv. Back then, it seemed like Russian boasts that they could take the Ukrainian capital in just 3 days might actually come true. But by late spring, Kyiv was safe. And 9 months after that first frightening night, Russian troops had been kicked out of important cities in the south and east. And that was where things had pretty much stopped. Since autumn of 2022, the front lines have barely moved, but the killing has continued. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers are now dead. About 10,000 Ukrainian civilians have been confirmed killed, with many more believed dead in Russian-occupied territory. Russian missiles still regularly hit all corners of Ukraine. The question I most often hear from my users outside Ukraine is this: it can't go on like this forever, can it? Many experts think that it could. We're going to be looking at the 3 most likely scenarios for the 3rd year of this war. Some predict this war could become a frozen conflict. Active warfare is contained to the front lines, and much of the rest of the country finds some kind of normality. Yet there's no peace.
I mean, I think we have to be pretty clear at this point that the only way that this war ends in negotiation is that neither side actually has the ability to go on. We're not talking about willingness, but the ability.
But what if instead, as Ukraine's exhaustion deepens, Russia takes advantage to make another attempt on Kyiv? Putin escalates the war.
It is clear from Putin's public statements that he is not changing his war objectives. He keeps denying the existence of Ukraine.
But not everyone's convinced that this war has to change for now. Some analysts say warfare will continue beyond the front lines, with neither side achieving much on the battlefield. They're expecting more of the same.
The history tells us that wars can go on for a very long time, and they can smoulder and almost look like they're dying out and then flare up again. So I don't think at all that it has to end or it's got to end.
Zaitsev in Donetsk. Back in 2018, this village was still under Ukrainian control, but Russian-backed troops were dug in at the end of the lane. This was the grey zone. I visited Katya and her children on my first trip to Donbass in 2018 and again in early 2022, just before the full-scale invasion. Her kids were so used to the artillery fire, they could distinguish different artillery calibers by ear. Their elderly neighbor was killed by a shell one summer's morning on her vegetable patch. But Katya and her children stayed. Just 100 kilometers down the road, in cities like Dnipro, life continued essentially unchanged. This was the situation between 2014 and 2022. Back then, Ukraine faced Russian-backed separatists rather than the full force of the Russian army. The fighting was confined to the immediate vicinity of the front lines. Missile strikes in Kharkiv, let alone Kiev, were unheard of. This scenario doesn't include peace treaties or any kind of normalization between Ukraine and Russia. Instead, back channels diplomacy and an understanding that the front lines won't move anywhere for the time being is all that it implies. It would give both countries and their armies the chance to recover and rebuild. Historian Sergei Radchenko says a frozen conflict could emerge if both sides are exhausted.
And we've had Ukrainian counteroffensive that obviously failed in a report perspective because the Russians have been able to dig in. The Russians, I'm sure, will have another go at trying to break through Ukrainian defense lines. And if that effort fails, then the question that Putin will face is, do Putin want to go on with this war that is actually having a major impact on the Russian economy, on the Russian society? Do I want to go on with this, or do I just say, okay, enough is enough? The Korean War increasingly turned towards stalemate, not because the sides wanted a stalemate, they just couldn't go on. And so I think the same also probably applies to Ukraine.
For now, at least, money isn't the main problem. It's people that both armies are running out of. We don't have reliable casualty figures. They're classified on both sides. In August of 2023, US officials estimated Ukrainian casualties had reached 70,000. The Russian deaths had topped 120,000. Many more have been severely wounded. And after 2 years of war, even those who've so far avoided injury desperately need a break. Finding reinforcements is difficult. Both sides are now drafting people, although both are still shying away from full mobilization.
I want to roll back this a little bit, all right? And something, I don't trust the news because they're pushing a certain agenda. Some of it's true, some of it's not, and you have to be really discerning. All right, so just watch carefully. All right, watch carefully as we transition to the soldiers.
Don't have reliable casualty figures. They're classified on both sides. In August of 2023, US officials estimated Ukrainian casualties had reached 70,000. The Russian deaths had topped 120,000.
Okay.
Many more have been severe.
Now, these people obviously have been fitted with, with US military gear, okay? That's not a surprise. They all are, they look worn and they're a little thin, okay? So they're probably burning a lot of calories. Now,
wounded, and after 2 years of war, even those who've...
Now, I'm looking at, some of these people are young, really young, like maybe even 18 to 21. Some of these other people, these two look pretty young. This guy here looks like he's around 24. One way on the back that has no hair, it's hard to tell. Probably looks older than what he really is because of the loss of hair. This individual here is well fed. These three here are not. They're, they look like they're either burning calories or they're not eating very well. These two here look like they're doing pretty well with food. This one here, same. Okay, now we're going to transition to something that caught my eye. This guy right here.
Avoided injury, desperately need a break.
All right, so most of them are either clean shaven or just a little bit of scruff. Except for these two, they've been in the field. I mean, they're not shaven. This guy, I'll tell you, this guy looks U.S. He looks, plus he's got he's got the sunglasses on. He's got that special force look. You know what I mean?
Finding reinforcements is difficult.
I mean, I could be wrong, but I mean, everyone else looks Ukrainian, but this guy here, I mean, he could be, But this guy just looks strange to me. Is he special forces?
Both sides are now drafting people, although both are still shying away from full mobilization. In Ukraine, those who wanted to volunteer are already in uniform.
I'm telling you, majority of the people that were in that picture that I was just showing, they don't have a lot of muscle mass, and they don't look like they're being fed the number of calories that they're burning. Now, this is in cold weather, so you burn even more calories. So that's to me seeming as though they're not as strong. The Ukrainians aren't as strong. The military force is starting to weaken.
Getting people to fight is politically costly in a democracy. Russian authorities are running out of recruits from poorer regions willing to sign up for good salaries. They're now having to draft people in big cities like Moscow, which could provoke resistance even in an autocracy. For this conflict to be frozen, both side.
When it comes to termite and pest control, you get what you pay for. At Terminix, that means nearly 100 years of pest control experience, free initial inspections and estimates, local expert technicians, guaranteed solutions for nearly any pest, 24/7 customer support, easy payment options, including online bill pay. Get your money's worth. Schedule your free inspection today.
Okay, so now that is that. Now, what I wanted to play.
This is how we made our work.
Now, what I wanted to play was what Neil Ferguson said over at DW.
So Neil Ferguson is
what Neil said over at DW during the conference that was taking place about 4 days ago. He's talking about the new Cold War. I should do a whole episode on just this concept of Cold War 2.0 that he has. But let's jump in. Before we do that, because this is Dante's Inferno, special edition of the New Yorker, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the vitamin D3 that you need to absorb calcium and to have proper gene expression, because vitamin D3 is a gene expression cofactor. And if you have an infected cell to help with apoptosis, you need vitamin D3 to help with that. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get your vitamin D3. I take 2 tablets of this a day. These are soft gels. And they're 5,000 units per soft gel. So I take 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. So it's 10,000 units per day. Resveratrol, also an antioxidant, and it's part of the anti-aging protocol. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the resveratrol. Synergistic with C60. It helps with, because it's an antioxidant, it'll help to bring down that stress in the cell, and it will help to improve the mitochondrial health and boost up the ATP. Clarity factor, very important to get rid of that brain fog and to improve your mental acuity. I take this twice a day. You take it, some people take it once a day, but you take it to be able to concentrate at work, to be able to focus on your education, your schooling, or the tasks that you have at work. In addition, if you take this on a regular basis, you're improving your mental acuity. You're getting rid of the brain fog, but you're improving your concentration. But you're getting those dendrites firing, right? You have neurotransmitters that if they're not firing at a proper rate, they'll start to recede. So by taking this regularly and being on an anti-aging protocol and taking care of your health and doing a little bit of exercise and a little balancing, right? Getting proper sleep, you're going to improve those dendritic connections by those neurotransmitters that are firing. When you take the resveratrol, right, and the C60 and neutralize the free radicals, well, what you're doing is you're improving your mitochondrial health and bringing up the ATP. You need ATP to help with releasing those neurotransmitters. You need a lot of energy. There's a lot of mitochondria that are in your neurons. So if your neurons are not as healthy and the mitochondria is not as healthy, the neurotransmitters aren't going to fire, and you're going to have dendritic recession, and you're not going to be able to think very well. Your thinking will be slower. You're not going to be able to remember as well. So you want to improve that. To improve it, take the clarity factor, get those dendrites firing, and you'll increase those dendritic connections. And it's synergistic with the C60 in avocado or coconut because it's soaking up the free radicals and improving the mitochondrial health. So if you want to improve your brain function over time and reduce the aging of your neurons, if you want to stop that, follow the protocol and take the clarity factor and the C60. Lastly, get vitamin C. It helps with the immune system. This is also with magnesium. So go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, to improve your immune system. Vitamin C is also very important to improve your skin. It is an antioxidant, but it's not as strong as resveratrol or C60. So, but for vitamin C, you need it for your skin, and you definitely need it for your immune system. If you're not feeling well, take a double dose. This is PNN.
Historian based here at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University in California. He joins us here at the Munich Security Conference. Neil, thanks for speaking to DW. So it's kind of striking that at this year's Munich Security Conference, obviously there's a lot of anxiety about Ukraine. There's a lot of anxiety about the Middle East. The one area where there's less tension in the air, at least here at the moment, is between US and China, especially compared to last year at this conference, when the spy balloon was just happening and the air was really full of that tension. So how should we think about that? Everyone talks about the temperature is lowering a little bit between the US and China, but the structural tensions between the two haven't got.
According to Monitor 4, and what's going on in Asia, the temperature is not cooling down, it's rising. Dante's Inferno, baby.
No, they haven't. And although the summit that happened in California back in November, which brought Xi Jinping and Joe Biden together near where I live in Woodside, went well, in reality, the underlying sources of tension haven't gone away. In particular, the fact that the Chinese regard the US as pursuing a policy of technological containment, that hasn't gone away. The tariffs haven't gone away. The friction over the South China Sea hasn't gone away. And so the fundamental reasons for this Cold War atmosphere have not gone away. What we're seeing, though, is détente. The Cold War isn't over, but the two superpowers are at least talking. And the most important thing that happened this year so far is something that did not happen. There was not a crisis over Taiwan. And that's a sign, I think, that something meaningful was achieved at San Francisco to make sure that we didn't actually end up with our own version of the Cuban Missile Crisis over Taiwan.
So, of course, we know what happened after détente. Eventually, the Cold War did end. Let's look a bit into the future. It's probably too early to say, but what are the things according to which we should judge?
Actually, the Cold War ended on accident because our CIA didn't realize how weak the Russians were at the time. We were shocked that the Berlin Wall fell, which is another failure of international intelligence from the CIA as they are building up capability to surveil the American citizen and to tell the powers that be in government how bad the American citizen is. They're eroding your constitutional freedoms. That's what they're doing. And they couldn't even get the job that they were enshrined by law that was signed by Truman to do. And that was CIA get intelligence about things that are happening internationally. So we're not caught off guard. But the reality is that they have just caused more problems. And then when someone is about to shine light on the problems that they've caused and the things that they've done illegally, they either kill the individual, discredit the individual, imprison the individual, or the CIA lies to Congress. Oh, AKA, was there a massive surveillance of American citizens? And the CIA director said no. But yet, it came out that he lied to the Congress and nothing happened. Nothing happened. And then we know what, has transpired the last 4 years to 6 years with presidential candidates in the CIA. So back to what they're saying, the Cold War. I mean, some of these people they interview are, I like watching DW, but sometimes the people that actually are speaking at the desk, reading the teleprompter or asking questions, at a conference, they don't have a really strong historical context or an understanding of the metaphysics of how things are emerging. And this is a case in point. Yeah, the Cold War ended. That doesn't mean that was because the United States did anything right. A matter of fact, we didn't think that the Berlin Wall would fall like it did. So our intelligence on Russia was garbage. Garbage. And I'm willing to bet that if you kind of look back since then about what was going on in Iraq and in Afghanistan and what was going on with Al-Qaeda and what was going with ISIS and what's going on in Ukraine, I bet a lot of the intelligence is just wrong, or they are purposely promoting faulty intelligence. Maybe they're promoting misinformation and disinformation. But there's something really wrong with the CIA and the national security state. All right, so that's my diatribe on the lack of arc of understanding by the interviewer.
How well or badly this is going?
Well, as an historian and one who spent a lot of time thinking about the Cold War recently, I would say that Detente in the 1970s worked quite well for the United States. It brought the Soviet Union into a discourse about a whole range of issues, including arms control and even technology transfer. It led to the Helsinki Final Act, which turned out to be quite a mistake for the Soviet Union to sign. And it gave the US breathing space to recover from the fiasco of Vietnam. So that by the time Ronald Reagan was elected, actually, the US was in a much stronger position than it had been in say, 1969, whereas the Soviet Union was in the process of overreaching. It had invaded Afghanistan. It was also engaged in Angola. And this overstretch ultimately led to a Soviet disintegration. Now, the question is, does the same playbook work in Cold War II? In other words, is all that the United States really need to do engage in détente, spend the next 10 years negotiating with China about semiconductors, climate change, and anything else you can think of, and wait for the kind of pathologies of a one-party state to take their toll? George Kennan predicted that the Soviet Union would ultimately succumb if you just contained it for long enough. I think Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken have a similar plan. Just contain China, play for time, avoid a showdown, avoid a conflict, and let the pathologies of a one-party state once again play out. And in demographics and in debt dynamics, and in the general slowdown that we've seen in China's economy, I think you see the first evidence that this strategy might work. But for it to work...
Is China weakening because of decoupling from China? Yes. Is there instability within the country because of a one-party system? Yes. Do you have a younger generation that has no idea what happened at Tiananmen Square? Yes. President Xi is getting older, but he still has many years left as long as he stays healthy. To my knowledge, he is healthy. Maybe he's not, but I believe he is. And he has an iron grip on the country. And because of his desire to be important in China's history, even during this weakening that Professor Neil Ferguson is talking about, I suspect that President Xi is going to fulfill his dream of controlling the island chains and take back Taiwan officially. And I wouldn't be surprised if it happens in 2024, which is this year, or 2025. I don't believe this idea of let's just don't do a conflict in Asia and hope for the best. I think President Xi is going to make his move on Taiwan. But there is a weakening that's taking place. And because of that weakening, that's what I'm fearing. It's not necessarily that a country that is strong will lash out. They could. But they may feel it's an existential threat and they're weakening and they have to make a move.
US and its allies have to stay on the same page. And of course, at the moment, there are all kinds of reasons why that might not be true.
Yeah, and I mean, I was in Taiwan also recently for the election, and it does seem that, you know, you see pretty much the same story in Taiwan, that Taiwan's only strategy is to cling on and hope that it outlasts China. Just quickly, in talking about the sort of one-party dynamics you refer to, Xi Jinping is, of course, he's extended his ability to stay in office, perhaps ad infinitum, compared to what was the practice in China before that, of having a sort of every 2 terms change. How much do you think that is putting China at risk, that its own system, which has proven pretty enduring, could come under strain because he's consolidated too much power in his own hands?
Well, nobody gets to reign ad infinitum. We're all mortal, including Xi Jinping and, for that matter, Vladimir Putin. And I think it's important to realize that at some point there will have to be decisions about succession in both China and Russia. And unfortunately, authoritarian regimes are quite bad at succession planning. That's one of the reasons that they come unstuck, either because there's a fight over succession or because somebody who's not really very good takes over, or in the case of the Soviet Union, somebody who's far too radical who inadvertently breaks the system. So I think what happens in China over a 10-year time horizon seems to be not likely to be Xi Jinping is there for the entire duration. I would be surprised if that were the case. I'd be surprised if 10 years from now, Vladimir Putin was still running Russia. So we sometimes forget that our enemies are mortal. And the West doesn't have this problem because we have a system of changing leaders through elections, which may not deliver the best leaders, but it doesn't produce succession crises of the sort that I think we'll see in both China and Russia at some point within the decade.
So you would see...
I would rephrase that, Professor Ferguson. There's a national security state that may not necessarily allow for proper secession in democracies. And that what the will of the people want doesn't happen because it's antithetical to the will of the national security state. Now, in a perfect world, which we don't live in, Professor Ferguson, in a perfect world, I would agree with you. But when you have a national security state that doesn't like certain types of candidates, then they get rid of them. And we've been doing that overseas for decades. We don't like a certain candidate. If we can't control that candidate, it's maybe running for president in one of the countries in South America, we'll assassinate, overthrow, cause a coup, whatever, to put in a president that we can control. And a lot of times this is tied to oil, but not necessarily all of this oil. It could be other commodities or just a geopolitical strategy during the Cold War. So if there was a candidate that was rising up in a country through the democratic process, and we as the national security state didn't like that, we happened to get rid of that flowering of democracy in that country. Just look at what happened in Iran. So why do we think that they don't do that domestically if they have so much experience doing it internationally? And Noam Chomsky, Professor Noam Chomsky, has written tons of books about this.
Essentially, it's a kind of a game of stamina then between the autocracies and the democracies. Right now, there's a kind of a wild card inserted into all of this in the Middle East. Like, you've been raising more warnings about Iran. Obviously, we don't know where the conflict in Gaza is heading. Talk to me about the wild cards there and how they could play into these bigger geopolitical conflicts.
Well, I've been a critic of the Biden administration's Middle East policy because I thought that the Trump administration's was quite good. The Abraham Accords were a success. Iran was contained by sanctions, and it seemed as if Israel was going to establish a succession of agreements to coexist peacefully with its Arab neighbors. The Biden administration came in January 2021 and said, no, we're going to put all that to one side and try and resuscitate the Iran nuclear deal. We're going to eat.
Because the national security state, putting in someone that was very weak, wanted to roll back everything that Trump did. They don't want something to work. So there's two things that were going on. One, anything that Trump did had to be reversed because Orange Man must be back mentality from the Democratic Party. On top of it, they want, the national security state has this desire to have a perpetual enemy, aka Iran, in the Middle East. They don't want to solve the problem. They keep on kicking the can down the road. And by not solving the problem and having a nuclear power rise in that region, then you got to start spending all this money for missile defense. It becomes a big money. And then you have enough people behind the scenes, throwing the cash around, saying, we'll just keep on the money flowing to Iran, the ones that are making the decisions. We'll allow you to go nuclear, and we'll keep on paying you so you don't push the button. And we'll spend all this money on missile defense. And if it gets too crazy, then we'll assassinate you. Meanwhile, the American taxpayer is paying for all this. And we're going to start seeing less services in our country, less security with our Social Security, less security for lifestyle. And we're going to probably see a major truncation of the number of jobs needed in the country because of AI and robotics. They don't care about the American citizen because they have their golden parachute. They're going to be on boards for this biological military industrial complex that has built up over the years. They don't care. They don't care about Joe Plumber or Susie the waitress. They don't care.
Sanctions on Iran to incentivize them. And lo and behold, what did Iran do with the additional money? Well, gave it mostly to its proxies, the likes of Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis. And these proxies have been playing havoc, most spectacularly in October the 7th, but actually it had been going on before then, and it's going on since then. And at some point, there's likely to be a further escalation because I don't think Hezbollah has acquired all those rockets and missiles just to polish them and admire them of an afternoon. So the crazy and worrying thing is that this strategy of trying to resuscitate the Iran nuclear deal has gone horribly wrong, is likely to produce more conflict, and one wonders just where we will be if that war on Israel's northern border were to break out. So there's a lot more that can go wrong in the Middle East. A lot of people in the region get the impression that they're waiting for Donald Trump to come back. This is the curious paradox. Europeans dread the return of Donald Trump. Many people in the Middle East rather hope he'll come back. I think both groups are exaggerating the importance of a change of president. And this is a habitual problem in Europe where they think that Democratic presidents are good and Republican presidents are bad. And it's sort of a delusion here. At the Munich Security Conference, I've heard the name Trump more often than I've heard any other name. And that's because there's an exaggerated sense that if he is re-elected, NATO's gone, Ukraine's gone, and who else knows what may be gone. I think this is to exaggerate how big a discontinuity there would be. Biden continued Trump's China policy. It was the Middle East policy that they changed, and I think that change turned out to be a mistake.
I mean, presumably the Biden administration would point the blame in the other direction, saying that it was Trump's mistake to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal in the first place. But just quickly to pick up on one thing that Tony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, said today, he was kind of talking up this idea that's been, bubbling around recently in the US media as well, of a sort of a grand bargain for the Middle East, where you have a proper move to a two-state solution, you have isolation of Iran, and that you have Saudi Arabia doing both a security deal with the US and recognizing Israel. It seems that the Biden administration is keen on this. We're hearing this from Tony Blinken, raising sort of the prospects of this today. What do you think of that? Is that a realistic prospect in the last few months of this first term of Biden?
Well, what's interesting about this is that so many parts of it resemble what was happening up until 2020 with the Abraham Accords. The thing that's different is this insistence that there has to be a Palestinian state. The problem is that I think the disillusionment in Israel with that idea is at an all-time high. And this is a very, very hard thing to sell to the Israelis. So I'm skeptical that there is going to be a two-state solution, given all that has happened. The Palestinian Authority is an oxymoron. It has no authority. Hamas is either going to be destroyed or some rump of it will survive in Gaza. It is extremely hard for me to see a grand bargain in the wake of October the 7th. The most that I think we can hope for is that we avoid further escalation, that we don't have a war between Hezbollah and Israel, and that over time, feelings may calm a little bit down, because I don't think the Arab states want this state of affairs. I think they hope the Abraham Accords would be the basis ultimately for further deals of the sort that were going to happen, were supposed to happen between Israel and Saudi Arabia. October the 7th derailed a lot. Expecting to be able to pull a grand bargain out of the hat after utterly failing to deter Iran over a 3-year period, I think that's a stretch.
Let's just, before we finish, talk about Trump.
Before we go to that question, let's do a commercial for PNN. I partnered up with Rainbow Herbals, and we have these great deodorant bars. All right. And this one is citrus scent. We also have a peppermint lavender tea tree version. It's a deodorant that is dual functional, right? It is used as a deodorant, but it helps to detox. It's made from essential oils from the Himalayas, very high quality. It's going to be the best deodorant bar that you can buy. So go to my store, le-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the citrus version or the peppermint, tea tree, lavender. It's for males and females. Use it as a deodorant, but it also will help to detoxify your body. Made with very high quality natural ingredients. There are many people, as the world is burning down, even though according to Professor Ferguson, we're in Cold War II, so it should be freezing, but it's a hot war. It's a slow hot war. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get Goodnight Formula. Because with everything that's going on, you probably can't sleep as the world is burning down. So to get that proper REM sleep, take the Goodnight Formula. You can take this every day. It has melatonin in it and tryptophan. And you will be able to get those 3 cycles of REM sleep that you need. Part of the whole anti-aging protocol is proper supplementation, proper diet, proper balancing, proper challenging of the brain. That means reading, writing, and talking to people, right? Proper nutrition, proper sleep. And by having all that and having those REM cycles, you'll be able to consolidate memory, and you're going to be able to get rid of those toxins that build up in the central nervous system. So you will notice that if you have regular REM sleep, you're going to be feeling more well-rested, you're going to have more energy, you're going to have better memory. And there's research out there that shows that people that are chronically not in REM sleep over many years will start to have health issues, especially cognitive decline. So please go to my store, get the Goodnight Formula, take it every day, especially for ones that aren't getting proper sleep, so you can get the 3 REM cycles of sleep to have the proper memory consolidation and the detoxification of your central nervous system. And you do it on a regular basis, it's going to improve your health. Now, if you don't have any problems with REM sleep, then you don't need to take it. But there are many people that do. So please go to my store and get the Goodnight Formula. It is very important to take a probiotic. All right, I have 2 different types of probiotic. I have a probiotic in a powdered form, which is this one, and I also have it in a tablet, in a tablet form. All right, or a capsule. It's in a capsule form. So take a probiotic every day. Why? Because you need the proper gut biome to be able to have the right composition of bacteria in your gut for metabolism, for energy absorption, to have better communication between your gut and your liver and your gut and your brain. Your health will radically improve by eating properly, drinking filtered water, taking proper supplementation, and repopulating your gut with a good pre and probiotic. All right. I take the powder on a regular basis. I mix it with my food. I mix it with hummus, but you can mix it with water. You can mix it with your food. And if you don't want to take the powder, many people prefer just taking the capsule. So you can purchase the capsule also on my store. So please go to my store and get the probiotic to improve your health. It's part of that anti-aging protocol. You want to holistically improve your system. And by having the proper gut biome, you're going to have regular stools, and you're going to reduce the chances of having polyps, and you're going to have better metabolism. So also, I have a multivitamin. Multivitamins are really important. They're cofactors for enzymatic activity. So please go to my store and get this very easy to digest multivitamin. Take it every day as part of the anti-aging protocol to improve your health and your enzymatic activity. And lastly, magnesium and zinc to improve your immune system. As we get older, and especially after the crisis that we just went through, our immune systems are weakened. We need to boost it up. All right, everyone's baseline pre-crisis immune system, pre-crisis, that baseline, all right, was X. All right, now after the crisis, it's below X, it's X minus. So everyone's immune system is down at varying degrees. Some people much worse than others. It's important to properly supplement your body and improve your immune system by taking magnesium and zinc. But there's many other things that I just mentioned that are helping with boosting up that immune system. You need more ATP, so you need to bring down that free radical load. You do that with C60 and resveratrol. You have to neutralize pathogens, so your body isn't chronically trying to fight something. You take that with structural nanosilver liquids and gels. If you listen to what I have to say, you're going to improve your health, and you're going to slow down that aging process. You're going to reduce that chronic problem that you have.
The elephant in the room, everyone talking about him. You said that you feel that European fears are maybe overblown. But he did say recently that, I mean, his statement was quite understandably taken as cause for concern, where he said in this rally that if he felt a certain country was not contributing enough to NATO, that he would even egg the Russians on to sort of have a go. Why do you feel that that shouldn't be so much cause for concern?
Well, Donald Trump's way of speaking is not that of other presidents. The psychology here is to make the Europeans realize that they can no longer continue spending less than 2% of GDP on defense while the US spent 3.5%. It can't be justified that the US pays for 69% of the total defense spending of NATO, 69%, more than 2/3. It's not like Europe is poor. It's not like the Germans couldn't afford it. They simply choose not to. And it makes no sense at all. What is interesting about the last 50 years is that
Professor Ferguson, the reason why the Germans do it and other countries in Europe have a low spending for NATO is because Americans allowed it to happen. Previous presidents in the national security state allowed it to happen. And these countries in Europe, they would prefer to put their precious euros in social programs and in healthcare, and having those dollars flow into domestic production for automobiles and whatever. So Europe, ever since World War II, has been a pig at the trough. And the American taxpayers have been footing the whole bill ever since. It's time to end. That's the point that Trump was making. And the reality of the situation is Europe can't afford it. Europe should be paying their defense. They are solidified through the European Union now. And it's time for them to pick up their defense. Not the United States. The United States should not be doing it. The United States doesn't have the money anymore. That's a key point. As the whole world is burning down, part of that is the financial stability of the American taxpayer because of a runaway national security state.
President after president has said, we really need to talk about burden sharing. And the Europeans have said, yes, we really do need to talk about burden sharing, and nothing has changed. The only president to get the Europeans actually to start spending more on defense was Donald Trump. This language upsets Europeans, but they need to get upset. This free riding that has been going on, especially since the end of the Cold War, is unsustainable politically. You cannot expect voters in, let's say, Michigan.
It's unsustainable, not just politically, it is unsustainable economically.
Been going on, especially since the end of the Cold War, is unsustainable politically. You cannot expect voters in, let's say, Michigan, to feel that it is their obligation to provide security for Germans in Central Europe when the threat of Russia is so much closer to Germany than it is to Michigan. It makes no sense.
Absolutely. But isn't it, in fact, really the shock of the invasion of Ukraine that is what finally kind of gave that real shove to, defense spending, for instance, in Germany, which will this year, I think, for the first time, hit 2% in many, many years. rather than those warnings from Donald Trump.
If our CIA was so smart, right, and a lot of them come out of Yale, so they must be smart, all right? If they were so smart, why didn't they listen to the 5 separate occasions that Putin said, stop with the encroachment, help us integrate economically? But the United States said no. How could the national security state not know that this was going to happen? They probably did, or they're really stupid. It's one or the other. They either knew it was going to happen, they wanted it to happen, or they're dumb. Which is it? The warning signs were there for 20 years. And all you got to do is listen to the Tucker interview with Putin, and Putin explains it for 2 hours in detail what those were. It shouldn't be a surprise unless our national security state was so dumb they weren't paying attention. Or was it the national security state was paying attention, they didn't give a damn because they had a plan. And that plan was to try to fracture Russia and get its oil.
I don't think German defense spending will hit 2% this year. I'd be very amazed. If you talk to my friends at the Kiel Institute, whose new paper on guns and butter has just come out, Germany has never spent so little on defense in its history. It's actually spending less relative to GDP than it was required to under the Weimar Republic, under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. So Germany has a very long way to go before it's spending anything like what it needs to spend. And the arguments against increased defense spending in this country make no sense. The debt brake is a very blunt instrument for maintaining fiscal rectitude. National security is not some kind of frivolous consumption. It's insurance against future disaster, and it's investment. And Germany needs to invest in defense technology. It has the capacity to be a really major defense economy. But it doesn't do it because of what seems to me to be economically somewhat primitive notions. So the national security situation was radically changed by the Ukraine war, but it has also changed because of Donald Trump's election, which, remember, happened 6 years before Russia's invasion in 2022. The world is changing. The transatlantic alliance is not forever because nothing in history is forever. And Europeans have to recognize that if you go around talking about strategic autonomy, and I've heard strategic autonomy until I'm almost sick of the phrase, at some point somebody's going to ask you to deliver it, and not just in a speech, in reality.
Neil Ferguson, thanks so much. A foretaste there of some of the arguments that we might be getting from across the pond later this year. Thanks for speaking to DW.
Thanks, Richard.
He has a longer video about Cold War II that I should be playing. I'll do that on another show. I'll play one more video and then we'll close it down. But please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the very high quality soaps that I have. They are structural nano silver soaps. This one's peppermint. This one is oatmeal spice. I also have lavender and charcoal tea tree. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get a couple bars of these soaps. Very high quality, helps to neutralize pathogens, and you know, it helps to support my work. And lastly, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nanosilvers toothpaste. This toothpaste will whiten your teeth, freshen your breath, reduce that gum inflammation, neutralize pathogens that produce plaque, so it'll reduce plaque, and with good oral hygiene, you're going to reduce cardiovascular disease. People don't know that actually the bacteria that is, you know, that is forming in your mouth, and especially with plaque, can get into your bloodstream and cause cardiovascular disease and valvular disease. So you want to neutralize pathogens. That's why, you know, swishing with your mouth and swallowing with the Max 35 every day, teaspoon, if you're not feeling well, a tablespoon or two, and using the toothpaste every day, and you're going to see huge improvements in your oral health. And when you go to the doctor, you're going to say, oh, they're going to be surprised that you have less plaque buildup for the cleaning. So just take my advice. If you really want to improve your health, go to my store at bud-studio-reykjavik.com and purchase the health products that I offer. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to play. I've been wanting to play this video for a while. This is about Taiwan, all right? And I keep on not doing it. So let's play this. This is Taiwan needs to what Taiwan needs to do to prevent an invasion by China. Oh, come on. Oh.
You're going to see a lot more of this man in the next 4 years. Taiwan's new president, Lai Ching-te. He's won himself one of the toughest jobs in the world, keeping Taiwan safe from Chinese attack.
然而，面对中国的文攻武吓，我也有守护台湾的决心。
That intimidation has intensified in recent years. Yet voters defied it, choosing Lai as their next leader. It's a slap in the face for Beijing. Lai once even said that he's for independence for Taiwan, something that in China's eyes makes him and those around him separatist criminals.
They are put Taiwanese future in danger. So they are the enemy of our Chinese nation.
Now, in his election campaign, Lai stressed that there's no need for Taiwan to declare independence because it's effectively independent already. But even that, of course, is not what China wants to hear. And its President Xi Jinping has repeatedly made clear that he reserves the right to invade Taiwan. And the trouble for Taiwan is that it's not ready to defend itself.
I think Taiwan's behavior in this context verges on the suicidal because Taiwan is voting for candidates whom Beijing has made very clear it regards as a serious provocation, fairly or not. And at the same time, Taiwan is not really doing anything near what it would need to do to make itself more defensible.
In part one of this video, we'll find out why Taiwan is looking so dangerously exposed and what it needs to do to boost its defenses.
It's to make sure that as China becomes more militarily capable and as the military balance of power continues to skew in its favor, that it continues to see clearly the costs of a potential military assault.
We'll hear from the former head of Taiwan's military, who says politicians have been spending too much on weapons that are prestigious but will prove useless in a conflict.
It spends a lot of money and would be easily destroyed from a long distance.
And we'll see how pressure looks set to mount from the US for Taiwan to take its defense more seriously, especially from conservatives who could soon be calling the shots.
The United States, at the end of the day, is going to help those who help themselves. I mean, that's only rational and reasonable.
Taiwan's new president is like a red rag to China, but his election was double-edged. Lai only won 40% of the vote in a three-way race, and both his opponents have called for reaching out to China. That means that Taiwan's new leader is under pressure not just to boost Taiwan's defenses, but to try to find a way back to dialogue with China too, something that's been deadlocked for years. In part two, we'll find out just how tough it would be to overcome it.
If Lai will not recognize one China principle, I don't think we can dialogue with him.
It's really hard for democracy to deal with non-democracy, and that's the situation we are facing right now.
And in part 3, we'll look at some wild cards that have the potential to mess up any plans that Taiwan's new leaders might make in its fractured new parliament.
The very fact that Taiwan political system becomes more pluralistic can mean that there will become more avenues of access for Beijing to seek to engage in and influence political debates.
And we'll zoom out to the global stage to see how Taiwan could find itself competing with Ukraine for American support.
I think Taiwan is much, much more important than Ukraine for the United States. If Taiwan is taken by the China, that means that China will dominate the Asia.
You can see just how high the stakes are.
Still think that Detente is going to work? Don't think so.
Just for Taiwan, but for both the world's superpowers, and for Ukraine and Europe and much more besides. But this is a story that begins in Taiwan with the question of whether it's ready to fight. It's a few days before Taiwan's elections, and we've come to interview a former president. Ma Ying-jeou is an elder statesman of the Taiwanese opposition, a man proud of building bridges with China. What he told us would dominate the final days of the campaign. We asked Ma about how to deter China from invading. Listen to what he said.
No matter how much you defend yourself, you can never fight a war with the man. You can never win. They're too large, too much stronger than us.
That idea that there's pretty much nothing that Taiwan's military can do to deter China from attacking, well, that caused a sensation. Many commentators slammed it as dangerously defeatist. Lai Ching-te seized on the remarks, saying that he was all about peace through strength. In fact, all the main parties were at pains to acknowledge that Taiwan needs a strong defense. The question is, how serious are they about that? It's no wonder this is an issue. China has ramped up military pressure in recent years, trying to intimidate Taiwan's people into accepting an inevitable reunification. It doesn't seem to be working.
The more heavily that Beijing leans into sticks, into threats, military activities, economic coercion, the more that the Taiwanese population will be skeptical of Beijing's intentions and will not want to unify with China. So in a way, this is a broken approach on the part of Beijing.
Taiwan might be resisting Chinese pressure, but it is not ready for war. Here's a man who can tell you why. Li Shimin is a former head of Taiwan's military. He's frustrated by what he sees as a dangerous lack of progress.
Well, I think we still have a long way to go to establish a credible capability.
Li says Taiwan's politicians are too attached to outdated thinking on defense, spending limited funds on big-ticket weapons that would be little use in a war with China.
We only rely on this kind of warships, big warships, fighter jets, and tanks, not be effective anymore because we spend a lot of money and it's rely on highly on the fixed base like airfield, seaports, or fixed radar installation. This will be easily destroyed from the long distance.
In Europe, the Ukraine war has showcased a different approach, asymmetric warfare, an effective way of fighting a more powerful invader.
An asymmetric strategy essentially acknowledges that, in contrast to the mainland, Taiwan has much fewer resources that it can work with when it's building up its military capabilities, when it's designing its military strategy. meaning that it should be procuring a bunch of smaller military systems that are mobile, survivable, but also expendable, so that it can hold down the fort in the event of an invasion, so that it gives the U.S. time to intervene.
Taiwan need this kind of anti-ship.
Spending less on high-ticket items for Taiwan, I think, is a smart move. But I also am concerned about the United States military, especially the Navy, becoming too technological, and that we don't have enough ships. And the ships we do have are so high-tech that you knock one out and, you know, you can't replace it very quickly. And the quality, the durability of these ships are in question. So even though we have very expensive Navy, we may not have a durable Navy if a war is drawn out long enough in the Asian theater. So there may be a lesson learned here. Perhaps over-teching your military is a problem. One, because it's too costly, and it takes a lot longer to manufacture if you need to replace the equipment.
So we also need the sea mines, and we also need mobile, highly survivable air defense system. We need a lot of drone, AI-enhanced attacking drone, but also system like the Javelin or Stinger. That's the last used in the Ukraine war.
It sounds like a long list, but that's only part of it. Admiral Lee says that making Taiwan ready to fight is a much bigger project.
First one, we have to develop the SMS capability. Second one, we should have a well-trained troops. Third is we should have a will to defend ourselves. Finally, we should develop the resilient society.
Taiwan is already Taiwan is already making some moves, extending compulsory military service for men from 4 months to a year. But Li Shimin would go further still, with an idea that reaches deeper into Taiwanese society, a territorial defense force based on volunteers.
I say, if you don't have to join military in the long term, but if you can be a volunteer, they become the territorial defense forces. We mobilize you maybe two times a year. You have your own job. We will give you a short period of training how to fight with the decentralized operation, and we give you the asymmetrical small arms. It just become the parts of the military.
Li Shimin says he thinks this could become a force of 200,000. A major boost to Taiwan's regular military. It would be all about resisting a Chinese attack until the US came to help. But that raises the next question. Can Taiwan count on America to show up?
It's a commitment we made.
Joe Biden has said on multiple occasions that he would defend Taiwan if China attacked. But the US has a lot of other things on its plate, like supporting Ukraine and Israel. And recent polling suggests that Taiwanese people are losing confidence in America. In fact, US weapons supplies for Taiwan are already coming under strain, with billions of dollars of orders stuck in a backlog. Now, with an election approaching and the strong chance of Donald Trump returning to the White House, US policy towards the region could enter an unpredictable phase. Elbridge Colby served in the Pentagon under Trump and masterminded his national defense strategy.
I think any future Republican administration is going to put China at the top of the priority list. I mean, if you look at the President Trump's administration, that was the major historic shift that he initiated and his administration initiated was a more tougher line on China.
But Colby adds that for that to translate into more support for Taiwan, Taipei has to deliver.
from my point of view, Taiwan's behavior, this is a kind of a tough statement, but I think it's true, unfortunately. It borders on vaguely suicidal behavior because Taiwan is voting for candidates whom Beijing has made very clear it regards as a serious provocation, fairly or not. And at the same time, Taiwan is not really doing anything near what it would need to do to make itself more defensible. And the United States, at the end of the day, is going to help those who help themselves. I mean, that's only rational and reasonable, especially when you look at the mood in the United States is pretty anti-interventionist.
So where does Taiwan's new president, Lai Ching-te, stand on all this? We spoke to a leading figure in his DPP party.
It's a very normal as what we see and what we see from Taipei and what we see from Washington DC may differ. But I think the most important thing is that we all agree that the two states and Taiwan's national defense ability is very important. And I think more and more people have realized that, especially after the Ukrainian and Russian war, asymmetric weapons might be very useful.
So Lai's team is on message about asymmetric warfare. And Lai has a crucial channel to the US right by his side. Vice President Xiaobi Kim served as Taiwan's emissary to Washington for several years.
We value the relationship with the United States very much. So this is why, also part of the reasons why he chooses Bitchute as his running mate. And she has been developing a very, very good relations with Washington, D.C. I think this will be very useful in the next 4 years and even next 8 years.
But there are still reasons why the new government might stop short of a full commitment to an asymmetric strategy.
For many Taiwanese, the most pressing threat isn't necessarily a full amphibious invasion by China. The most pressing threat are the day-to-day incursions that they are dealing with from Chinese military planes and ships, which have reached a new level of frequency and intensity. And so Taiwan has a challenging set of requirements to face.
Plus, in terms of defense spending, Lai has talked about aiming for 3% of Taiwan's GDP. That's roughly the level of the US, but it's well below that of Israel, a country also facing existential threats. And it might not be enough to satisfy a future Trump White House.
I think 3% is woefully inadequate. I would say 10% would be, I mean, I don't think there's a particular figure, but Israel is actually much less threatened than Taiwan. There's no great power that's lusting after Israel.
You can see questions piling on questions, and there are even more to come. The new president will not have a majority in parliament, and parts of the opposition are skeptical about going all in on boosting Taiwan's defenses.
If slowing down a little bit more on Taiwan's purchase of U.S. defense weaponry can mean that it gives Beijing more face and more upfront for Beijing, and thereby slowing down Beijing's major threat against Taiwan, then Taiwan, according to that logic, can have its defense and stability without spending money on buying weapons. Sounds like almost the best of both worlds, and it's cheaper too. So I think that argument, you will see a number of legislators on the opposition side pursuing it.
This will make managing parliament absolutely crucial for the new president. We'll have more on how that's going to be tricky later, and how the ambiguous result of this year's election could throw up major surprises.
Taiwan's voters seem to be saying to Lai, "You're our choice, but try to get on with China."
So in part 2, we ask, does Lai have options besides boosting Taiwan's defense? Can he reach out to China in some way, even manage to calm things down?
So the next episode that I do, we'll go through part 2 and part 3 about Taiwan, and hopefully I'll be able to get the opinion from Miss Taiwan on this. So thank you for listening. Please, I have this new product where I create this module of classes dealing with the pulmonary system. It's a pulmonology module. And there are 22 classes with PDFs of the lecture slides that you can download and keep on your local. You'll have access to it on my website, and each lecture has a video where I'm going over the material. It's 22 lectures. I have 12 or 13 of the lectures already uploaded on the website. Each day I upload a new lecture. There's going to be a total of 22. It's only for $50, and you get access to all the material. All right, all 22 lectures, all the PDFs. When you purchase it on my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, on the store, there is a section called classes, and then you can click the pulmonology module for $50. Once you make your purchase, you'll get an email of what your unique password will be. And you just go to classes up at the top, at the home page, and click the module that you purchased, and type in your password, and it'll give you access to the lecture material. Each lecture that's uploaded has a PDF file that you can download or just view, on the website. And there is a video accompanying that slide deck. It's a lot of information. It talks about embryology of the pulmonary system, the anatomy of the pulmonary system. It goes over ventilation and perfusion. It goes over diseases like COPD and asthma and pneumonia. It goes over bacterial infections and viral infections. It goes over the physiology, the histology of the pulmonary system. It goes over a lot of material. You'll see x-rays, you'll see CT scans. You're going to get a lot of information. Why should you purchase this module for $50? One, it helps support my work, but also it challenges your mind, and it gives you a baseline of how the pulmonary system works. And other modules that I will release will build up on this knowledge, and you'll get a holistic approach in how the body works, because I'll be doing it system-based. So please join the journey. It's very popular, this module. Go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and purchase the pulmonology module for $50, and you will have access to a lot of material on the pulmonary system, and you'll be a discerning individual. You'll be able to know about the pulmonary system. By learning these things, you're challenging your brain, which is part of the anti-aging protocol, right? You'll learn on how to improve your health. And not just that, when you go to the doctor, you're going to have more knowledge. You're reducing that power imbalance between the patient and the doctor. The doctor can take advantage of you because of their knowledge. So if you reduce that power imbalance, you're going to be a more discerning patient, and you'll be able to manage your health care better with your doctor, because you'll be able to ask questions. You'll have a baseline of understanding. In addition, you'll be able to be more discerning when you start seeing things in the alternative media or even in mainstream media. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the pulmonary module for $50. Thank you for listening, and have a nice night.